Well, thank you for the introduction, and thank you, Laurent, for the great introduction to modeling and simulation. Makes my job easier. So I am here with my colleague, Jose, and I just wanted to give you a little bit of background about how we ended up here in Lesvos. So my research actually started in Rwanda, and my interest is in why refugees get stuck as refugees for so long. So if you don't know, on average, people are refugees for now, on average, more than 20 years. Those generations born into exile who have no connection to their home country and not necessarily any connection to their host country if they're not welcome there. These are refugees without a solution. So when you think of resettled refugees who are in your countries now, in Norway or in the US, those are not included in that. These are refugees without solutions. And so my fieldwork started in this camp in Rwanda that's been there for now over 20 years, and I interviewed a variety of people there, but I was really moved by the youth there who have no recollection of the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, where they came from. And some of them were 4 or 5 years old when they came to the camp, but their parents died or were lost in transit, so they don't actually even know where they're from in the Congo, and they always worry, what happens when Rwanda sends us home? Because they don't plan to locally integrate us. They don't believe that we belong here, and even though they're nice and they're great hosts, we don't want to stay. We believe we're Congolese and we want to go home, but we don't even know where home is. And so this question really motivated our models about, could we look, so I'm a political scientist or international relations scholar by training, and we wanted to look and see if there are certain global macro level processes that make people get stuck. And Africa, the developing world is home to most of the protracted refugee situations, and the UN defines protraction as more than 5 years, but really on average more than 20, and that doesn't include the Palestinians. So this is a large number of people. And it tends to fall off the radar. People don't think about them anymore because they're not in immediate danger. Right? They're in relatively stable, unfortunately stable conditions in reality. And these are just wasted lives across the planet that can't contribute in any way. So what if we could look at protraction, but in its very earliest stages? What if we could go to a place that looked like it was on the verge of also getting stuck? And we had the opportunity to come to Greece through Apostolos' invitation and Laurent. And so Greece looked like one of those places. And this came up in discussion a lot in the last 2 days, that one of the things the locals here have not yet accepted, and this closes some of the doors perhaps to some of the solutions, is that it looks like refugees are going to be here to stay. And maybe if not here to stay on Lesbos, definitely here to stay in Greece, right? There are certain political processes that are causing bottlenecks, and those bottlenecks, Africa can tell you, become permanent in many cases. And what was supposed to be temporary, and people keep promising, don't worry, we'll come, we'll help, we're going to resolve this situation, turned into decades. And so we were our interest brought us here to Greece to try and capture that moment and see if it could inform any of our ideas about how protraction arises in the first place, and whether or not we could use some of the information and the data and the processes that we find on Lesbos, not only to help Lesbos, but also to try and reach out to other refugee situations across the planet and see if there are any generalizations that we could learn to stop these from happening. So this all comes down to this idea of the UN's durable solutions. If you're not familiar with the UNHCR's durable solutions, they propose 3, and these are long-standing. You could, in order of preference, repatriate home to your home country, assuming that the conflict resolves or the disaster resolves. Locally integrate in the community that's hosting you, or resettle abroad. And right now, less than 1% of all of the 66 million refugees or forcibly displaced people in the world that they mentioned on Friday, only about 1% of them ever find any one of these 3 durable solutions, which means the rest of them are stuck, right, in some kind of situation. And the vast majority are not in camps, they're in urban situations. But the UN's trying to work on envisioning some sort of alternative to durable solutions. But our idea was, what if we could use modeling to look at the processes that contribute to protraction and see if there's a way to create an alternative to these three durable solutions? Are there other options? Because these options are not working. And so we've designed a few models that I'm just going to briefly show you. I won't get into the nitty-gritty because I actually have a rally and cry instead. But there are all different kinds of modeling paradigms, different ways to model situations. What we're looking at here is the Syrian refugee exodus, and looking at the options that are available to them and the barriers, the political barriers, the financial, social barriers that arise that sort of force them into different bins. So that cut off the options for, say, resettlement abroad or local integration or repatriation. Obviously, it's not going to be great. So this model allows us to sort of fine-tune what rates at which they're being accepted into these durable solutions to show where the bottlenecks start to build and how quickly they build. And so modeling isn't just for prediction. And I think for social science researchers or even practitioners, they get a little bit uncertain about using models to predict something that's so complex and so nuanced. And modeling isn't just for prediction. It's often in social situations not a great predictive mechanism, but what it does do is help us facilitate dialogues. It helps center policy discussions, and so we're not all sitting pointing fingers saying, but you should have been doing this or you should have been doing this. Instead, we can use models to map out those relationships, see where those bottlenecks happened, so that we can all sit down and agree, okay, well, failure happened at these 2 points, so let's start talking about that instead of pointing fingers, and that ideally helps move the discussion along. And it can help explore different scenarios, as Laurent mentioned. You can't experiment with people, but you can experiment inside of models. So you have these artificial worlds where you could see what would happen if some of these proposals that came up yesterday in discussion, if, why can't we just provide Moria with more shelters? And then UNHCR says, but where would we put them? And so you can model these situations in order to move the discussion past what will work here to, can we try this? Can we try this? And try and see what happens. But the other thing that we like to push for modeling and simulation as a separate track, and that it can be used to help teach STEM education, both in the camps and outside of the camps. It's an online resource that you can access. You can watch YouTube videos. We can come in and train people. But you can build your own models. So we don't need to build them for you. If you have processes inside your nonprofit organizations, inside your institutions, inside, or even from a refugee's perspective, looking at the camp life from their viewpoint, you can build models to help illustrate the problems and even the good things that you see for transfer to other situations. So this is how modeling happens. It's not this magical, I appreciate that you don't think that we're super nerdy, Apostolos. What happens is modelers can help you structure some of these thoughts. And once you go through the exercise a few times, you'll see that it's a really sort of disentangling process. So you have all of these ideas and all of these complexities inside your head about the processes and what happened exactly during the crisis, right? And who was acting where, and some of the random volunteers running around who were just handing out apples and wanted to take selfies, and then the people who were really trying to do work. There were a lot of things going on. So what we can do is start taking the interviews that we do with different stakeholders, with ethnographers, social scientists, and start mapping these things out and disentangling them. This doesn't look like disentangling them, but this is step one. So these are our notes from some of the ethnographers that we've worked with. And we start mapping them out. And what happens when you map them out is you start seeing the missing pieces. So what exactly does this mean? And how do you account for things like community solidarity or trust, which makes us start digging into what are these processes? What made Lesvos unique in its answering to the refugee crisis? And from there, we begin. This is our first attempt to connect the dots between the different stakeholders. We've interviewed the ethnographers, locals, from trying to piece together exactly what the crisis looked like in a model form. So to give you an example of relative ease of looking at processes, we developed two very simple models. I assure you that you could do this. We could teach you in a matter of hours to start building your own models in this way. These are going to be two models that are exactly the same, just different modeling paradigms. And what you see is the process of refugee reception. So we're interested, right now, part of our missing piece in the puzzle you just saw was what happens inside Moria. It's kind of this enigma right now, and so we're looking at, we've built up the processes, right? So refugees come in to the island and they're sort of pre-processed at the beach and loaded onto transit and brought to Moria, where they have to go through these different stages of processing. And so this is a very simple model of process. So you can look at where the bottlenecks are and say, this is where we really need more resources. We need them here. Again, a very simple model. This is a different version, but of the same model, looking at it spatially. So you can see in the blue above the map, these are people coming in boats. You can adjust the amount of flow, so the rate that they're coming in, and the rate levels that they're processed at. So you can start to play with, well, what happens if we get a big flow, but we don't have enough people? How quickly is this backup going to build? How quickly is this going to become a crisis? And again, we understand that in the case of Lesvos, many of the systems and processes are already in place here. And so you're ready and you have these mental models to prepare yourself for what will happen. But what can we learn from here that helps other people? Why should anyone else have to relearn the same processes that you've learned? And so by building these models, we can also transfer that knowledge to other scenarios. And so what we want from you, this is our rallying cry. We're still piecing together this model, and we need data. And data isn't just numbers. It's not just, I can go to the UNHCR portal and look at flow data for Greece. That's not what we want. What we really want are your experiences. So your narratives, your experiences running NGOs, being on the beach and answering the original crisis, the different time points when the situation in Greece shifted dramatically. These are all data points that are important in building models that help us understand what happened, what went well and what didn't, what works and what doesn't. Documents, any reports, even about your network. So if you're an NGO or just a volunteer who's an individual and has moved between sites, what resources do you provide? And who provides resources that help you do what you need to do? And who relies on you, right? What other organizations rely on what you do in order to do what they do? That helps us map out the network of individuals, organizations, stakeholders who all contributed to this response, the humanitarian response. And so from academics, we can co-create these models together. We don't need to do this in isolation. Many of you work on the same types of projects that we do, that there are academic theories that might inform parts of the model that we can never quantify. The field research that you do in your own areas, and even the models that you're building, maybe we can incorporate them together and build something that's more robust. So we want to encourage all of you that modeling is something that's very accessible, and it sounds like you'd have to learn computer science or you'd have to learn coding, and that's not the case. Modeling is a way to help you structure your thoughts and to structure your processes. So it's a very approachable method, and at its simplest form, you don't need to build fancy interactive AI. That's not how this goes. We can help start the process. We can give training if you're interested in building them yourselves. We can help develop models if you have data and ideas, but you don't have the time or you aren't ready yet to build your own models. And this is this idea of participatory modeling. So can we use modeling to look at all kinds of things? We want you to build your own models. We want to help you build your own models, maybe put them together and build something that's bigger. But we can also transfer the STEM education. How can we get the refugees in the camps who have time and maybe access to computers or technology, as the discussion yesterday talked about, can we get them access so they can start building models of their world, because they know things about the process we'll never know. And in terms of the entrepreneurship and hubs, can simulation help with any of that? Maybe simulation is one of the technologies, but it could also help us understand how to build out this technology hub to incorporate different populations. So the one thing that we'd like to hammer home today is that modeling only matters if people buy into it. So we need stakeholders to want to use the models, to want to see the results of the models. Otherwise, there's no point building them. We can build models by ourselves all day long. We can look for data on the internet. We can do our own field work. But if it's not going to make a difference, then it's not worth building. So if we build them together, if we develop central repositories where we can put the data and share in this information and try and model the entire situation of Lesbos, maybe we won't just help here. Here, we still have a crisis. We still have too many people in Moria going into the winter and still no action, right? But this is happening in other places too, and so maybe if we build a model of this, we can show how much bigger this problem is and come up with some kind of solution. So these are some resources for you if you're interested, some easy ways to get started modeling yourself. Like I said, we're happy to help you get started or refer you to videos if you want to get started on your own. We can give training, we can facilitate modeling. This is not a sales pitch. What this is we really believe in trying to find answers to protracted refugee situations, to refugee crises and the way that we answer them, because the ways that we do things now are clearly not good enough. And our hope is that modeling and simulation can offer some sort of insight into these that we haven't yet come up with, that in our disparate ideas and our disparate experiences and our very different brains, that maybe collectively there's something there that no one's yet seen. So maybe this sounds like pipe dreams, but I want to believe that there's something that we can offer through modeling and simulation that at least helps policymakers move in a more positive direction and keeps us all from being stuck doing the same things over and over again. Thank you.